Close your eyes, listener, and picture a sky full of distant stars, each one pulsing softly like the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Somewhere beneath them, in the far reaches of a glowing planet called Sheely, a child is born. Her skin is warm orange, her eyes wide with curiosity, her montrals already listening to the wind. Her name is Ahsoka. But tonight, you are not here for war stories, not for battles. You're here to drift beside her, not through action, but through feeling, through memory, through every moment of light and shadow that shaped her. Because Ahsoka Tano wasn't just a Jedi, she was something rarer, something gentler. A quiet thread of hope sewn into a galaxy tearing at the seams. You'll hear about the day Master Plo Koon found her, his voice calm as the clouds, and how he brought her to the Jedi Temple. You'll hear her laughter as she sparred in marble halls, her training sabers humming through the air, her heart full of questions she didn't yet know how to ask. You'll meet a boy, older, restless, brave, named Anakin Skywalker, who would become her teacher, her brother, and one day, her greatest sorrow. But for now, in this gentle telling, they are only a team. Sky Guy and Snips, lightsabers and lessons, missions and mischief. As the Clone Wars sweep across the stars, you'll feel the tension pull, not in your muscles, but in your chest. Because war changes people, and Ahsoka, she changes too. She sees loss, she sees kindness, she sees betrayal. She walks into the fire and walks away from it. She leaves the Order not with anger, but with silence. A silence so deep, it echoes louder than battle cries. But even outside the temple walls, Ahsoka doesn't vanish. She becomes fulcrum. She becomes the woman who saves others, who speaks through shadows, who chooses light not because it's easy, but because it's right. You'll follow her through hiding, through resistance, through storms. You'll stand beside her on Mandalore. You'll kneel with her after Order 66. You'll hear her heartbeat slow as the galaxy collapses, and still, she keeps walking. And in time, she will return, cloaked in white, eyes steady, voice softer than ever. She will look into the face of Darth Vader and see the boy she once knew. She will step through the world between worlds and realize she's more than a soldier. She is a witness, a guide, a bridge. And tonight, she's your guide too. Through every chapter of her life, softened, slowed, told like an ancient tale under stars. So breathe with her, rest with her. Let her story unfold like petals opening at dusk. No rush, no noise, just light. Ahsoka's light, fading in, not out. And as you listen, may her journey remind you, you don't need to carry the galaxy to make a difference. Sometimes, all you need is to care. So, wherever you are under blankets, beside night lamps, or in the quiet corners of sleep, welcome. This is her story. This is the full story of Ahsoka Tano, to fall asleep to. On the quiet, sun-dappled grasslands of Sheely, where purple skies met golden plains and the wind carried stories like songs, a child was born, not to royalty or power, but to peace. Ahsoka, her name whispered like a blessing, arrived beneath the watchful eyes of tall Tress and soft suns. Her mother, Pavti, held her gently while her father, Nak-Il, smiled at the sky, for the breeze had stilled just for a moment, as if listening. Even in infancy, there was something different about the little Togruta. Her markings were distinct, her skin the soft hue of clay, her montrals already sharp for her age. But it wasn't appearance alone. It was something in the way she gazed at the world, as though she were already listening to things others could not hear. Her people lived in harmony with nature, trusting instinct, hunting with honor, and living in rhythm with the seasons. But Ahsoka, she felt the beat behind the rhythm. As she learned to walk, her steps would pause at strange intervals, stopping not because of distraction, but because of something deeper. One afternoon, as the village prepared a festival of the moons, little Ahsoka wandered near the woods where no child was supposed to go. Her parents, trusting her more than most, let her follow the butterflies in sunbeams. There, among the tall brush and soft shadows, the moment came the test. A massive creature, a prowling saber-tooth, emerged from the trees, hungry and silent. But Ahsoka, barely older than a toddler, did not cry. She didn't run. Instead, she tilted her head and looked into its eyes. And the creature stopped, lowered its shoulders, and sat. That day, she rode back to the village, not in her father's arms, but on the back of that same beast, gently, quietly, as if the two had spoken through something older than words. Her mother trembled, but smiled. The elders nodded slowly. She had been chosen, not by tradition, not by ceremony, but by the Force. A shaman came later that week, dressed in ceremonial beads and light feathers, and confirmed what the wind already knew. Ahsoka Tano had a gift not only of sight, but of connection. The Jedi would come soon. They always did when a child like this appeared, when the Force whispered loud enough to reach even Coruscant. But before they came, before her life changed forever, Ahsoka's days were filled with soft joy. She'd wake to birdsong, race the other children to the creek, and laugh when the leaves danced above her head. Her father told stories under the stars about the moons and the old hunters, while her mother taught her the way to listen, to wait, to feel. One night, as Ahsoka rested on a smooth stone near the family's fire, she heard something distant. A hum, not of the wind, not of a voice, but of something else. She turned her head to the sky, eyes wide. Somewhere far beyond the clouds, a ship descended. Blue lights flared. Metal touched earth. And down the ramp came a tall figure in tan robes. Master Plo Koon. He had come not to take, but to offer. He knelt before her, speaking gently, and Ahsoka did not shy away. She walked forward, as if her feet had already known the path. The village gathered, quiet and proud, tears mixing with the joy of knowing her life would stretch far beyond this place. Her parents, though hearts aching, embraced her not with fear, but with faith. Pavti whispered in her ear, "You were always meant to help the stars." And with one last look at the only sky she'd ever known, Ahsoka stepped onto the ship, her small hand in Plo Koon's. As Shili faded beneath the clouds, she did not cry. She sat, calm and curious, looking forward. The Jedi Temple waited. But this chapter, this quiet chapter of home and harmony, would live forever in her. It was the root beneath the tree she would become. And as the stars welcomed her into their fold, the little one from Shili closed her eyes and dreamed. Punti Tindi Bi Tont. The stars she gazed upon from the viewport weren't just lights anymore. They were invitations, windows into a wider galaxy she was just beginning to understand. As the ship drifted toward Coruscant, Ahsoka sat beside Master Plo Koon in stillness, her tiny hands folded in her lap, her eyes reflecting the starlight with wonder, not fear. Plo Koon didn't speak much during the journey, but the silence was never empty. It was comforting, like the hush of the Shili plains after sundown. He would glance at her every so often, nodding quietly, as if he already sensed the rare calm blooming within her. Ahsoka, even at 3 years old, asked no questions. She simply listened, not with her ears, but with something deeper her instincts already tuned to the hum beneath existence, the invisible current Jedi called the Force. When the temple first came into view, rising like a mountain of wisdom above the endless cityscape, Ahsoka leaned forward, wide-eyed. The towers shimmered in gold and silver, the spires like fingers reaching to touch the very stars she had admired from her home. Inside, the halls were vast and echoing, but filled with soft light and hushed voices. She was met not with cold analysis, but with gentle curiosity. Jedi masters and knights, tall, graceful, cloaked in years of discipline, studied her quietly as she passed, and some smiled as they sensed her aura. She met other younglings, 2 children from dozens of worlds, each with their own stories, faces, and gifts. Some were shy, others loud, but Ahsoka remained steady. In her first test, she was asked to stack small stones using only the Force. Where others strained, furrowing brows and gritting teeth, Ahsoka simply breathed and lifted them all. Not high, not fast, but steady, balanced, as if the stones trusted her. Her teachers noted it instantly. Her connection wasn't driven by power or ambition, but harmony. She didn't dominate the Force, she joined it. Even when she stumbled in saber practice or during meditation, she never grew frustrated. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, smiled faintly, and tried again. And when Master Yoda finally observed her, he watched in silence for a long time before saying only, strong. But still, this one listens. Her bond with Master Plo deepened over those early years. Though he was never formally her teacher, he became something more sacred, a quiet guardian of her spirit. He checked on her progress, brought her warm food when she fell ill, and once gifted her a tiny carved totem from Shili, a simple stone shaped like a leaf. "So, you remember where your roots are," he said. Ahsoka carried it with her always, even during dreams. At night, beneath the temple's starlit ceilings, she sometimes dreamed of the saber-tooth from her village, its silent strength, its golden eyes, its trust. She imagined it walking beside her through temple corridors, watching over her as she grew stronger, faster, wiser. In the initiate clans, Ahsoka was placed with Bear Clan, where her agility and balance earned her quick notice. She could leap higher, land softer, and flow more gracefully than most her age. But again, it wasn't just skill, it was intuition. She felt where to move before she moved. In duels, she was rarely the most forceful, but often the last one standing. There was one lesson in particular, the mirror trials, where a Padawan had to face their own fears through Force illusions. Some wept, others panicked, but Ahsoka, she faced herself in the mirror and whispered, "I'm still learning." The illusion faded, like fog burned away by morning light. She was younger than most, but wiser than many. Still, she was just a child. And in the quiet corners of the temple, she missed her mother's voice, her father's laugh, the rustle of tall grasses in the wind. Sometimes she pressed her forehead to the cold window and imagined home, trying to remember how the breeze smelled when it carried the scent of cooking fires. But then Master Plo would walk by and offer a nod, nothing more, and that small gesture reminded her she wasn't alone. Years passed like water, and by the time she was 12, the Masters had begun whispering of her future. The council debated who might take her as Padawan. She was strong, promising, and ready. But more than anything, she was herself, never molded to fit expectations, never bending into what others thought a Jedi should be. She asked questions, not with rebellion, but with clarity. She learned to wield her lightsaber not as a blade of war, but as an extension of purpose. In meditation chambers, she could remain still for hours, and when she smiled, it made even the sternest masters pause. But war was beginning to whisper. Trouble stirred in the galaxy, a tremor in the force that even the youngest initiates could feel. The Clone Wars loomed, and the Jedi would need more than discipline. They would need hope. So the Council made their choice. Not a traditional pairing, not the match anyone expected, but one the Force itself may have guided. Her master would be Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one. Reckless, brilliant, fierce. Many whispered that he was too unorthodox, too volatile for a Padawan. But Ahsoka didn't flinch. When she was introduced to him standing tall and poised, despite her youth, she met his intense gaze not with fear, but with curiosity. "You're stuck with me, Sky Guy," she said, half a smile rising. Anakin blinked and chuckled. That was the beginning. Not just of training, not just of battles, but of something deeper, a bond forged in the fire of trust, risk, and growth. But as she walked beside her new master toward their first mission, Ahsoka looked up once more at the stars. Somewhere out there was Shilly. Somewhere her parents still believed in her, and within her cloak, tucked safely in a small pouch, the carved leaf totem remained warm against her chest, like a whisper from home. The little one from Shilly was now a Jedi Padawan, but she had never let go of who she was, and that would shape everything to come. When the title Padawan settled onto Ahsoka's shoulders, it felt like stepping into a new skin, not tight or strange, but uncertain, like the first breath in an unfamiliar climate. Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, wasn't what she expected. He was intense, unpredictable, often distracted, yet magnetic, like a blazing star that pulled everything into orbit. Their first moments together were awkward and mismatched. She called him Sky Guy to shake his ego loose. He rolled his eyes, calling her Snips for being quick-tongued. It was sarcasm wrapped in fondness, and neither of them knew it yet. But those nicknames would become something sacred. The war came quickly. Barely had she found her footing when the Clone Wars pulled her into battle. Her first mission with Anakin was at Christophsis, where she was supposed to deliver orders, but ended up in the heart of a firefight. She didn't just follow, she adapted. Lightsaber flashing, voice steady, she made bold decisions that even Rex, the seasoned clone captain, took notice of. Anakin didn't want a Padawan, but by the time they stood under the blue haze of the battlefield, back to back, sabers humming in tandem, he saw something familiar in her. Not just bravery, not just talent, but the same fire that lived in him. They clashed often, of course. Ahsoka asked questions. She disobeyed orders when her gut told her the council was wrong. But she also listened deeply, with purpose. And Anakin, for all his bravado, listened back. Together, they became something rare, a master and apprentice who grew side by side. Their bond deepened in the silence between missions, in the stolen glances of worry, in the quiet campfires on forgotten moons, in the way they both would leap to defend others before themselves. She learned tactics from him, aggressive, intuitive, and reckless. But she also learned when to pull back, how to feel the rhythm of danger and use it like a current. In battles on Felucia, Ryloth, and Umbra, she became not just a learner, but a leader. Her command over the 500 first earned her the troops' trust. Even hardened clones followed her without question. Not because she was a Jedi, but because she saw them not as numbers, but as people. She knew their names, laughed with them, grieved with them, and they, in turn, would march into fire for her. There were scars, too. On one mission, she lost troopers under her command, a trap she hadn't foreseen. The guilt weighed heavy, but Anakin sat beside her, silent under the stars, and whispered, "We don't win every time, but we learn." She carried that forward. When she led a stealth operation on Mustafar, she used every lesson balancing strategy with empathy, ferocity with grace. And then came Geonosis. It was there, in the swirling orange dust and endless droid fire, that Ahsoka and Anakin fought side by side in one of the largest offensives of the war. She held the line, saved Master Luminara, and even when surrounded, refused to fall. The Council began to see her not as a child, but as a force, a Jedi in her own right. Still, it wasn't glory that drove her. It was loyalty to Anakin, to the clones, to what she believed the Jedi could be. She questioned the Order's politics. She noticed the cracks in their teachings. But she kept fighting not for the temple, but for the people. Her lightsabers, now twin blades of brilliant green and yellow-white, danced through chaos like twin comets. And her voice, calm, assured, became a beacon to those who had lost their way. There were quiet moments, too. Ahsoka once asked Anakin if he was afraid. He hesitated, then confessed he had dreams of loss, of things he couldn't stop. She didn't press. She only nodded and later left a small carving at his bunk, a circle of stars, each one unbroken. "To remind you that not all endings are sad," she said, and he kept it. But even through the victories and the bond they built, the shadows were growing. Palpatine watched. The Force trembled, and Ahsoka, still so young, but no longer naive, began to feel it. Her place in the war was changing. So was the Jedi Order, and soon, so would she. The war did not wait long. No sooner had Ahsoka learned her master's name than she was flung into battle alongside him, dropped into the dust of Christophsis with little more than a blade and faith. And yet, she held her own. She stood beside Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, the hero, the whirlwind, and she pushed back against his doubt with boldness and spark. Not arrogance, but presence. She called him Sky Guy, and from that moment on, something changed in him and in her. They were mismatched in many ways. He was fire. She was storm, but they burned in harmony. Where he was impulsive, she was measured. Where he raged, she learned to breathe. And where he felt quiet and guilt, she reached out, reminding him that not all roads led to darkness. Their first missions were messy, imperfect, but alive. From skirmishes on Ryloth to battles on Felucia, they fought not just droids, but uncertainty, strategy, and time. Each victory felt earned, not given. And in the spaces between conflict, Ahsoka grew. Not just in power, though her agility with 2 lightsabers began to draw whispers among the ranks, but in perception. She watched how Anakin looked at command, how he protected those beneath him even when the code frowned upon it. She absorbed his rebellion not as recklessness, but as empathy. She followed Captain Rex through the trenches and found kinship in clones, men born for war who joked, dreamed, and grieved like brothers. She named them, respected them, and in return, they gave her more than loyalty. They gave her trust. She questioned orders when they felt wrong. She took detours to save lives. She meditated not just for clarity, but to remember what she was fighting for. Even when other Jedi saw her as Anakin's learner, she was forming her own view of the galaxy, one that blurred the rigid lines of Jedi teachings with something more human. And Anakin, for all his chaos, gave her space to find that view. He trained her fiercely, but never crushed her spirit. He challenged her, but also defended her when others doubted her readiness. And somewhere in that fragile, flickering war, she became not just his student, but his mirror. She reflected the best in him, the gentleness he buried, the laughter he lost. And maybe that's why he held on to her so tightly, even as the war pulled harder at their seams. They weren't just Jedi and Padawan. They were family. On nights between hyperspace jumps, they'd sit on the floor of the cruiser hangar, Ahsoka asking questions about the Force, about love, about choices. Anakin never gave perfect answers, but he listened. And when he didn't know, he admitted it, a rare vulnerability for someone who carried galaxies on his shoulders. Their bond was not free of tension. He was protective, sometimes too much. She was stubborn, sometimes too much. But they navigated that rhythm like duelists in sync. When Ahsoka was wounded, Anakin wouldn't sleep until she recovered. When he veered too close to vengeance, she reminded him of compassion. When the galaxy began to whisper of loss, betrayal, and destiny, they clung to each other as anchors. Because while war tested the Jedi, it also revealed them. And Ahsoka, brave, blunt, bright Ahsoka, was becoming more than anyone expected. She wasn't just learning to wield the Force, she was learning to feel it, to interpret it through emotion, through connection, not just through doctrine. She saved younglings on Ilum. She calmed riots with words instead of blades. And in the heart of the Clone Wars, with enemies on all sides and shadows growing deeper, Ahsoka Tano, once the little one from Chile, stood beside the most powerful Jedi of his time and became unforgettable. But even she didn't yet know how fragile that peace was, or how soon it would break. The war dragged on like a long shadow across the stars, and Ahsoka Tano walked beneath it, growing, breaking, rebuilding. Every mission was a new page in her training, but the lessons were no longer clean, crisp Jedi proverbs. They were messy, full of gray. On the Outer Rim sieges, she watched good people fall while bad plans prevailed. There were days when saving lives meant disobeying orders. And Ahsoka, as always, trusted her heart more than doctrine. Her bond with Anakin remained unshakable, but even that began to strain under the weight of war. He was pulled into darker corners, secret meetings with Palpatine, flashes of anger that flared too fast. Ahsoka noticed. She asked. He waved it off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Still, she stood by him, because love isn't blind, it's brave. Her loyalty wasn't just to Anakin anymore. It was to the clones who followed her into danger, like Rex, with whom she'd built a quiet, trusting rhythm. They trained together, bled together, laughed about bad rations, and swapped old battle scars like siblings do. But loyalty, Ahsoka learned, comes with pain. On Lola Sayu, she was captured by bounty hunters. She escaped, of course, but not without bruises, and not without wondering why she had to do it alone. Then came Onderon. Ahsoka was sent to train rebels, ordinary people who wanted freedom, not power. She taught them stealth, defense, and hope. And in return, they taught her something even deeper, that the Force doesn't belong only to the Jedi. That justice isn't a lightsaber. It's a choice made daily. It was in those forests, under firelight and whispers, that Ahsoka began to glimpse a future not bound to the temple. But her greatest test was yet to come. When someone bombed the Jedi Temple hangar and framed Ahsoka for it, the betrayal came not with a lightsaber, but with silence. The Order turned cold. Her friends stepped back, She was hunted, imprisoned, alone. Only Anakin fought to prove her innocence, racing against politics and pride. But by the time the truth came out, that it was Barriss Offee, her fellow Padawan and friend, who had fallen, it was too late. Ahsoka had seen the cracks too clearly. The council offered to reinstate her, but she said no. With quiet breath and trembling steps, she walked away from everything she had once been. That decision rippled like a tremor through the Force. Anakin chased after her, confused, wounded. "I understand wanting to leave the Order," he told her, his voice heavy, "but I know what I've started. Won't be able to stop." And she looked into his eyes and knew he wasn't speaking only of the Jedi. They said goodbye, not in anger, but in heartbreak. Ahsoka left the temple without rank, without title, without lightsabers, but not without strength. She wandered the lower levels of Coruscant, wearing plain clothes and walking among those the Jedi had forgotten. She helped where she could: a broken droid, a frightened child, a shopkeeper under threat. In her quiet kindness, she rediscovered purpose. When the siege of Mandalore came and Bo-Katan cries asked for help, Ahsoka returned, not as a Jedi, but as herself. She reunited with Anakin and Obi-Wan briefly. Anakin returned her lightsabers, now glowing with a softer blue, his parting gift. They hugged one last time. Neither knew it would be the last. The siege was brutal. Maul had taken control of Mandalore, twisting it into a battlefield. Ahsoka faced him beneath collapsing catwalks and shattered beliefs. He tried to warn her of Anakin's fate, of Sidious's rise, but she didn't believe him. Couldn't. Not yet. She defeated Maul, not with anger, but with clarity. But even victory was brief. Order 66 came like a thunderclap. The clones turned. Her own soldiers, her friends, were now her executioners. She and Rex barely escaped, their hearts shattered. She refused to kill them. Instead, she found another way, honoring every name, burying every brother. She left her lightsabers behind, buried them too. Let the galaxy believe she had died. In truth, a part of her had. But loss did not end her. Loyalty did not break her. It's transformed her. In the quiet beyond war, Ahsoka Tano breathed again. Not as Jedi, not as soldier, but as something new. A wanderer with no name, carrying the fire of everything she'd seen, and everything she still hoped to be. Ahsoka drifted through the stars like someone searching for both answers and stillness. Not lost, but unanchored. After leaving the Jedi Order, she carried the silence with her, a silence heavier than noise, filled with questions no one had answered. Who was she now, without the Jedi? Was she still meant to serve the Force, even if the Order had let her down? The war raged on, and she watched it from a distance at first, like someone seeing their home through a rain-streaked window. Her cloak was no longer white, no longer armor, it was gray, lived in, practical. She changed her name, hid her presence, walked the lower levels of Coruscant, then left altogether. On the moon of Rada, she lived among farmers, planted roots, helped fix harvesters, patch wounds, and taught small kindnesses that didn't require a lightsaber. She grew close to a young girl named Kaden, whose bravery and warmth reminded her of everything she fought for and everything she feared losing again. But the Empire was growing like a shadow over the galaxy, and it always found the light. When stormtroopers came to Rada and tried to take what wasn't theirs, Ahsoka couldn't stay hidden anymore. Her instincts pulled her forward. She defended the village, exposed herself, and just like that, she was hunted again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Bail Organa reached out, offering her a place among the early rebel network. Hesitantly, she agreed, not because she wanted war, but because she believed the people deserved peace. She took on a new identity fulcrum, passing intel across systems, helping others resist the Empire. Her face became legend again, but now in whispers. She trained rebels, lit signals of hope in the dark. Yet even as she worked from the shadows, the past never stopped echoing. She wondered about Anakin, wondered what had happened the day she walked away, if she had changed something by leaving. Could she have stopped him from falling? Could she have saved him? The ache of not knowing became a quiet part of her breath. When Ahsoka finally crossed paths with the Ghost Crew, Ezra, Kanan, Hera, Sabine, Zeb, and Chopper, it was like a new chapter had opened. Ezra reminded her of herself, curious, emotional, hopeful. And Kanan, a Jedi who'd also survived the Purge, became an unexpected mirror. They worked together to rescue survivors, challenge Inquisitors, and spread resistance across Lothal and beyond. But it was in the Sith Temple on Malachor where Ahsoka would face the storm she'd been outrunning. There, beneath obsidian stone and ancient whispers, she met Vader. Not the man she once called master, but the dark figure he had become. Their duel was mythic and tragic. She fought not to win, but to reach him. "I won't leave you. Not this time," she said, voice trembling with memory. And Vader, voice distorted and cold, replied, "Then you will die." But for a moment, just a moment, a piece of Anakin flickered in his eyes, a crack in the mask, a gasp of the past. They battled until the temple collapsed around them, and for years, no one knew what had become of her. She was presumed dead again, but time is not always linear in the Force. Ezra would one day pull her out of that moment, through the world between worlds, saving her in a ripple of destiny. And Ahsoka, forever changed by the brush with fate, stepped forward into a life that no longer asked her to be a Jedi, just to be herself. She had lost so much: her innocence, her order, her master. But she had also gained something rarer, a clarity born from living through both light and dark. And in the stars that stretched endlessly before her, Ahsoka Tano found a new kind of loyalty, not to rules or titles, but to people, to peace, and to the quiet promise that even those who fall can still rise. They called it justice. But for Ahsoka Tano, it felt like exile wrapped in robes of formality. The moment she was arrested, shackled like a criminal, the Jedi Temple felt colder than space. She had once walked these marble floors with wonder in her step. Now each echo of her boots felt like betrayal. Accused of a bombing she didn't commit, hunted, betrayed by clones she once trusted, and silenced by masters who were once her mentors. Even Anakin, the brother and friend she trusted most, seemed torn between faith and fear, trying to help her, but powerless to stop what was unfolding. The Jedi Council, usually so calm, now looked like distant statues. They spoke not with warmth, but with caution. Their voices weighed down by politics and pressure from the Senate. Ahsoka stood alone in front of them, not just as a Padawan, but as a symbol of what they feared: the cracks in their perfect wall. Barriss Offee, her close friend, turned out to be the real bomber, someone who saw the war tearing the Jedi from their core and chose terror over truth. But even when the truth came out, even when Anakin brought the evidence forward and the council cleared her name, something had already broken. They offered to welcome her back, gently even, as if the whole ordeal had been a misunderstanding, a test. But for Ahsoka, that offer wasn't peace. It was a mask, one she couldn't wear anymore. She looked at them, at Yoda, at Mace, at Ki-Adi, at Plo Koon, who had brought her to the temple as a baby, and she realized they hadn't stood by her when it mattered. Their faith had wavered, and her heart had shattered. So she walked away, not in anger, not in defiance, but in quiet, mournful clarity. The world she had lived in since childhood, the very identity she had breathed in every ritual, every lightsaber swing, every council mission, she let it go. Anakin followed her into the courtyard, trying to change her mind. His voice soft, desperate. He said he understood, that he too had doubts about the council. But Ahsoka turned to him, her eyes full of sorrow, and whispered, "I know," because she believed him. But belief wasn't enough anymore. She needed space. She needed to find who she was without the Jedi shadow cast over every choice. And so she stepped through the temple gates one last time, her robes trailing behind like falling leaves, and walked into a galaxy that was no longer familiar. It was both the end of something sacred and the quiet beginning of something freer. The stars above were the same ones she had stared at from the temple windows, but now they felt wider, scarier, and more honest. She wandered from world to world, no longer bound by missions, but guided by instinct, helping quietly, staying hidden, learning who Ahsoka was without the title Padawan. She fixed things in marketplaces, healed injured travelers, stopped fights before they turned violent. She missed the hum of her lightsabers, but not the noise of war. She missed Anakin, but not the weight of the Order's expectations. There was sadness in her exile, yes, but also peace. A peace she had never truly known before. The kind that comes from listening to your own breath and finally hearing it. Ahsoka didn't vanish, not from the galaxy and not from the Force, but she let her name slip into the quiet. No more missions logged by the Jedi. No more transmissions signed Commander Tano. She was simply Ahsoka, now a traveler, a helper, a healer when needed. On dusty Outer Rim worlds, she worked in shadows, never staying long. Farmers remembered a kind girl with strong hands who helped them repair harvest droids. Miners recalled a quiet stranger who calmed a child trapped in a cave collapse. No one knew her past, and she didn't speak of it. But the light within her never dimmed, not even after the betrayal, not even after leaving everything behind. She carried at the light like a secret, glowing ember tucked inside her. Some nights, she still dreamt of the temple, the long corridors, the training halls, Master Yoda's gentle riddles, and always Anakin laughing, dueling, saving lives. She missed him, more than she allowed herself to admit. But she also knew he had a destiny bigger than either of them could hold. And maybe she had escaped a fate he couldn't. The Clone Wars raged on, and though she wasn't part of it anymore, the war always found its way close. She saw its scars in broken cities, orphaned children, angry soldiers. Once she stumbled upon a battalion of clones, abandoned after a skirmish. Their helmets cracked, their loyalty confused. They looked at her with the same painted armor and called her commander out of habit. She knelt beside them, helped to remove shrapnel, bandage wounds, and listened. She didn't speak of the past, just offered comfort in the present. But even in that detachment, Ahsoka couldn't hide from herself forever. The Force tugged at her, whispers in dreams, visions of darkness rising, of Anakin's face, flickering between light and shadow. She didn't know what it meant, but it unsettled her. Still, she walked on, one planet to the next. The world called Rada was quiet, peaceful. For a while, Ahsoka believed she could stay. She worked on a farm, kept her head down, made friends. She even smiled more, let her guard down. The quiet was healing, but it didn't last. The Empire arrived slow at first, then with crushing weight. Ahsoka saw it, fear creeping in, freedom shrinking, people silencing themselves. She couldn't stay hidden, not anymore. The Jedi in her stirred, not in titles, but in values. She began helping again subtly, carefully, disabling Imperial equipment, guiding workers in resistance. But her presence was eventually noticed. An Inquisitor came, a hunter of Jedi. He didn't know her name, just sensed her light. The fight was fierce. Ahsoka, without lightsabers, without backup, stood her ground. Her movements were graceful, like memory given form. And when she defeated him, it wasn't with rage, but with calm. After the battle, she realized something. She could not run from who she was. She wasn't a Jedi, but she wasn't no one either. She was something new, something freer. So she contacted Bail Organa, trusted his offer of a growing rebellion, took the name Fulcrum, and began again not as a soldier, not as a Padawan, but as a guide, whispering across the stars, offering help where it was needed, coordinating hope in secret. Ahsoka Tano had left the Jedi Order, but she never left the light. The galaxy had changed not with a bang, but with a slow tightening. Star systems that once lit up with freedom now dimmed under Imperial control. Planets whispered of curfews, of vanished neighbors, of stormtroopers, where once there were peacekeepers. And through this silent twilight, Ahsoka moved like mist between moons. She had no army, no council to guide her, just the quiet certainty in her chest that the light still mattered. The name Ahsoka Tano was no longer spoken aloud. She became a shadow with a voice, Fulcrum, a quiet guide behind rebel cells forming in the cracks. She wore no Jedi robe, she carried no title, but she connected people who refused to give up. She passed messages through smugglers, slipped intel into repair manuals, and coded hope into static-laced transmissions. "This is Fulcrum," her voice would say, neutral and calm. "Stay patient. You are not alone." And that was often enough. Across the Outer Rim, young rebels would huddle over flickering comms, eyes wide with something they hadn't felt in years: purpose. Still, behind the code name, she was lonely. Even in movement, in mission, in meaning, loneliness crept in. She missed the rush of Anakin's ridiculous plans, the wisdom of Obi-Wan's restraint, the laughter of clone troopers sharing meals under stars. Sometimes, when she passed a group of soldiers singing around a fire, she'd pause in the shadows not to join, just to remember. But she didn't linger. The Empire watched everything, and she was too important now to be caught. One step ahead, always. Her ship, modest and unmarked, became her home, a floating cave in the stars. Sometimes she tinkered with old droid parts. Sometimes she meditated. Sometimes she just stared at hyperspace trails and wondered if Anakin would have laughed at her quiet life of secrets. She didn't know what had become of him. Only rumors. Jedi gone. Temple destroyed. Vader rising. That name chilled her. It was always just out of reach, like a breath she couldn't take. One day the Force rippled, not in pain or fear, but in curiosity, a disturbance, a spark. It came from a small crew on a ship called the Ghost, a family of rebels, young, reckless, kind. They reminded her of someone, so she watched, not as a spy, but as a quiet helper, sent them tips, saved them from ambushes, misdirected an Imperial probe here, planted misinformation there, and when the time was right, she revealed herself. The Ghost Crew didn't know what to make of her, especially the boy. Ezra, a Padawan without a master, raw, emotional, strong in the Force. Ahsoka saw herself in him and Anakin, and every student caught in a war too early. She guided him gently, taught him not just power, but restraint. That the Force wasn't about control, it was about connection. She told stories, softly, not to boast, but to share, of battles and betrayals, of friends long gone, of choices made when no good options existed. Ezra listened. He was impulsive but kind, and he needed her. So did Kanan, the boy's master, hiding his fear behind discipline. Ahsoka respected him, trusted him, and slowly together they made ripples bigger than anyone expected. They sabotaged Imperial factories, freed prisoners, sparked revolts. Fulcrum was no longer just a whisper, she became a symbol. Hope had coordinates, but the darkness was never far. One mission changed everything. A Sith temple, an ancient place pulsing with forgotten power. Ahsoka descended its cold stone halls with Ezra and Kanan, sensing something familiar but wrong. A shadow waited, tall, armored, breathing in a way that made her heart freeze. Darth Vader. The moment their lightsabers clashed, she knew. She didn't need proof, didn't need a voice. She felt it. Beneath the mask was Anakin, her master, her brother, her friend. The duel wasn't just blades, it was heartbreak turned physical. He struck like a storm. She defended like memory. He accused, she begged. "I won't leave you. Not this time," she whispered. But he answered with fire. Their battle shook the temple. Kanan and Ezra escaped. Ahsoka did not. At least, not in the way they expected. When the smoke cleared, she was gone, presumed dead. But the Force had more stories for her still. She should have perished that day beneath Malakor's broken sky, facing the dark truth of her past. But instead, the Force moved like a whisper through time itself. Between the cracks of fate and memory, a hidden place waited, the world between worlds. There, in a vast expanse of stars and shifting pathways, time folded upon itself like pages in a book. Ahsoka's hand reached through a gateway, and another hand pulled her back. Ezra. Years later, older now, braver, still trying to make sense of destiny. He had found the doorway, and in doing so, had saved her. But the moment wasn't just a rescue. It was a gift, a second chance. She watched her own past collapse behind her, watched Anakin walk further into the shadows of Darth Vader. And then, gently, she stepped forward, not to change the past, but to honor it. The world between worlds was a strange limbo, glowing with paths not taken. Whispers echoed there, voices of those long gone, Jedi and Sith, friends and foes. But Ahsoka didn't stay. She wasn't meant to. She returned quietly to the galaxy that had moved on. The war had evolved. Ezra was gone. The Empire was crumbling. The rebellion was rising. Yet still, she wandered. This time, not as Fulcrum, not as soldier, but as a seeker. She no longer had a council to report to, no uniform to wear. She was simply Ahsoka, a name that once meant exile, now meant choice. Across distant worlds, she walked among refugees and farmers, fixing broken speeders and calming frightened children. She listened more than she spoke, helped more than she fought. In a time when many were choosing sides, Ahsoka chose people, and in doing so, she became a legend whispered in campfires, the white-robed woman, the lady with the glowing eyes, the one who came and left peace behind. She rarely used her lightsabers now, not out of fear, but because she had learned that peace could be powerful. That sometimes the most radical act in a galaxy of war was simply to listen. And when she did act, it was swift, quiet, precise. There were inquisitors still, even after Vader's rise. Hunters who prowled for any lingering embers of Jedi. One followed her to a moon where a family had hidden holocrons in their cellar. He was confident, cocky. His blade crackled red. Ahsoka didn't speak. She disarmed him with 3 graceful moves. And when he reached for his blade again, she looked him in the eyes, not with anger, but with sadness. "You don't have to follow him," she said softly. But the Inquisitor did, and Ahsoka struck. That was the lesson. Mercy without naivety, strength without hate. She kept moving, always. A white cloak, a staff, a ship that hummed gently, like a lullaby in space. She visited Old World's Mandalore, Ryloth, the ruins of the Jedi Temple. Sometimes she left flowers. Sometimes she knelt in silence. Sometimes she heard Anakin's laughter in the breeze or saw his smile in the stars. She still didn't know how to feel about him. Love and grief danced in equal measure, but she had stopped trying to separate the two. And then she heard rumors of Thrawn, of strange galaxies, of missing friends. Ezra's name returned like a forgotten melody, not gone, just waiting. Ahsoka's heart stirred. She had been a Padawan, a soldier, a fugitive, a ghost. Now she would be a seeker once more, not for war, but for someone who once reached across time to save her. It was her turn to reach back. The stars whispered, the Force stirred, and once again, with steady breath and silent steps, Ahsoka moved forward. The stars above Mandalore never looked still, not even for a moment. Fires bloomed in orbit, streaking across the heavens like falling knives. War thundered in the distance, echoing off the domed cities and broken cliffs. But deep within it all, in the eye of that storm, stood Ahsoka Tano. She was no longer a Jedi, no longer a general. And yet, she had returned to war, summoned not by duty, but by something more sacred: loyalty. Maul had resurfaced, the ex-Sith cast off, now clawing for control of Mandalore, turning its warrior people into pawns of vengeance. And so, Ahsoka had gone, not because the Republic asked her to, but because her friend did. Bo-Katan Kryze, fierce and proud, had come to her with a simple plea: help me save my world. And Ahsoka had nodded, not as commander, not as council member, but as a friend. When the ship landed on Mandalore's surface, the air was already burning. Clones descended, with jetpacks flaring, and Mandalorians in crimson armor returned fire from shattered balconies. The streets became a blur of blaster fire, dust, and rising smoke. But Ahsoka, even without a title, moved like a beacon. Her blades were blue once more, gifted by Anakin in a moment of warmth before this final mission. "They'll suit you better than me," he had said. And she had smiled, not knowing that would be the last time she'd see him as him. Through the battle, she danced not with rage, but with grace. She didn't fight to win. She fought to protect civilians, soldiers, even enemies when she could. That's what set her apart. She still believed there was a way to walk through war without becoming it. But deep in the palace, Maul waited, not with armies, but with questions. When they finally met, it wasn't just a duel, it was a confrontation of truths. Maul didn't seek Ahsoka's death. He wanted her alliance. He told her the truth the Jedi refused to hear, that the Republic was crumbling, that Darth Sidious had already set the final domino, that Anakin Skywalker was the key to it all. Ahsoka's heart wavered. Maul's words didn't feel like lies, they felt like warnings. But she didn't believe Anakin could fall. Not yet. And so she chose to fight. Their battle tore through Mandalore's throne room, blades clashing against shadows, sparks flying like stars, anger and control balancing on a knife's edge. Maul was powerful, unhinged, desperate to reshape fate before it swallowed him. But Ahsoka was centered. Still, she didn't need rage. She had clarity. And in the end, it was clarity that defeated him. She spared his life, ordered him taken alive. Not for revenge, but for answers. Because she still believed the war could be ended, the darkness exposed. But time was cruel. Before she could deliver him to justice, the galaxy turned. Order 66 fell like thunder. Betrayal, not from across the battlefield, but from behind. Her own soldiers, men she had bled with and laughed with, turned in an instant. Because a command had come from above. Because the Jedi had been marked for extinction. And Ahsoka, though no longer Jedi, still stood in their light. Trapped aboard a crashing cruiser, hunted by the very men she tried to save, Ahsoka did not lash out in fury. She wept, she mourned, she fought only to survive and to protect the one soul who stood by her, Rex, loyal to the end. Together, they buried the dead. Together, they let the ship fall into silence. The siege of Mandalore had been meant to save a planet, but in its echo, the Republic died, and Ahsoka, once again, became a shadow among the stars. But something had changed. She had seen it, the flicker of truth behind Maul's madness. She had felt it, the tremor in the Force, when Anakin's name was spoken with fear. And in her heart, the first crack had formed. The galaxy had changed. And somewhere in its shattered sky, so had he. When the sky above Mandalore finally stopped burning, the silence that followed was not peace, it was grief. The Republic had claimed victory, but at what cost? The people of Mandalore looked upon the ruins of their cities, upon the bodies of friends and foes alike, and saw only devastation left in war's wake. And Ahsoka, who had fought not for conquest, but for justice, stood quietly at the center of it all, her heart heavier than any victory could lift. The battle was over, but the true fall had only just begun. Deep in the belly of the captured Republic cruiser, Maul screamed inside his confinement, a prisoner whose madness suddenly sounded far too much like prophecy. The Force around him rippled with something unnatural, and Ahsoka felt it. The shift, the fracture, she couldn't explain it, but the stars felt wrong, like the entire galaxy had exhaled its last breath. Aboard the ship, she sat beside Captain Rex in the medbay, sharing a rare moment of quiet. He smiled at her with tired eyes, cracked helmet in his lap. "You did good, Commander," he said softly, still using the title despite her leaving the Jedi. Ahsoka smiled, though the name didn't fit anymore. "Not a commander," she reminded him. "Not anymore." And then it came. That moment. The transmission, the chip in Rex's head activating. His hand trembled, his breath caught, and his eyes changed. Ahsoka sensed it a split second before it happened. The violent twist in the Force, the danger laced with sorrow. She didn't want to believe it, not even as Rex raised his blaster toward her. But even then, she didn't strike to kill. She dodged, she disarmed, she ran. The ship, once a symbol of Republic unity, became a death trap of corridors and betrayal. Clones who had laughed with her only hours ago now chased her with silent, mechanical precision. They weren't angry, they weren't hateful, they were following an order. one they had no power to resist. She wept as she fought, her lightsabers flashing in defense, not fury. She used everything she had learned not to win, but to spare, to escape, to find Rex. And she did. With courage and trust, she removed his inhibitor chip, fighting not only the programming in his mind, but the pain in his heart. When he awoke, tears already in his eyes, Rex whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you." And Ahsoka, still breathless from the fight, whispered back, "I know." Together, they made a plan. Not to fight their brothers, but to survive them, to respect them, to lay them to rest when the time came. And as the cruiser fell from orbit, a flaming coffin above an unnamed moon, Ahsoka and Rex did just that. They buried the fallen, clones who had followed her, protected her, turned on her, and died, still wearing her colors. She left her lightsabers behind, planted in the dirt among the graves. A symbol, a farewell, the end of the war, the end of who she had been. And somewhere, far away, Anakin Skywalker was no more. Darth Vader was born, but Ahsoka did not know yet, not fully, not until years later, when the shadows stretched longer and the galaxy forgot her name. But as she walked into the unknown, cloak drawn tight, feet slow against the ash, she carried with her something the Empire could never touch: mercy, memory, and the light of what might still be. The siege of Mandalore was over, but the war inside Ahsoka had just begun. The galaxy changed its name in whispers. The Republic faded like a dying star, and the Empire rose in its place with thunder and steel. But Ahsoka Tano vanished. Not with a farewell, not with a headline. She simply walked into the folds of the galaxy's shadows, where the dust of old wars covered everything: names, dreams, wounds. She became a wanderer without a banner, a guardian with no temple, a Jedi in everything but name. Far from Coruscant's towers in the burning skies of Mandalore, Ahsoka found herself in the outer reaches, on worlds that the Empire forgot or chose to forget. Planets with cracked soil and tired people, where hope flickered like candlelight in a storm. And there, in the quiet, she did what Jedi were meant to do. Not lead armies, but help the helpless. Not command fleets, but carry firewood, fix water pumps, teach kindness again. She never introduced herself as Ahsoka. She used simple names, Ashla, sometimes, others when needed. But every time she healed a wound, lifted a stone, stopped a blaster with the Force, someone remembered. A child whispered, a farmer stared too long. "You're one of them," they'd say. "You're a Jedi." And Ahsoka would shake her head gently, always. Not anymore. But in truth, she was. More Jedi than the robes that betrayed her. More Jedi than the generals who fell to darkness. More Jedi than the Jedi themselves, who were now dust and memories. Yet in the silence of stars, she missed them: Plo Koon's calm voice, Obi-Wan's wry patience, Master Yoda's riddles, and above all, Anakin, the brother, the fire, the sky that once held her steady. She didn't know what became of him, not yet, only that the galaxy mourned him, and the man she knew had vanished like the Jedi. Still, sometimes she dreamed of battles fought side by side, of laughter in the corridors between missions, of a look in his eyes, fierce but kind. But then came the whispers, the first tremble: Darth Vader, a name spoken in terror by those who had seen him, a black figure who moved like a storm, who crushed ships and souls alike, who hunted Jedi like ghosts. And in those whispers, Ahsoka felt something she didn't want to feel, a knowing, a dread. a flicker in the force that pulled at her bones. She pushed it away. She had work to do. She could not chase shadows. And so she wandered on, helping when she could, hiding when she must. Until one day, on the moon of Rada, everything changed again. Disguised as a mechanic, she'd made a life for herself quiet, unnoticed, enough. But then came the Empire, with its boots and scanners and suspicions. And Ahsoka, though she tried to stay small, could not ignore what they did to the people. When a friend was taken, when crops were seized, when a child cried, she acted. And in that moment, the mask slipped. She was Ahsoka again. And the galaxy noticed. The Inquisitors noticed. The Empire noticed. The game of hiding was over. She fled, fought, survived. And in doing so, lit a new flame, one that would lead her to the rebellion, to old friends, to new dangers, and to the mask she feared most. For the name Darth Vader no longer belonged to myth. He was real, and waiting. But the girl from Chile, the Padawan, who once laughed beside Anakin Skywalker, would not run forever. She would stand, look him in the eye, and ask what became of the man she once called brother. The sky above Malihor was wrong, the kind of sky where light felt afraid to shine. It hung low, heavy with echoes, echoes of wars long ended, but never forgotten. Here, beneath the ruined Sith temple, the Force itself twisted and turned like a labyrinth with no exit. Ahsoka had followed a signal, but more than that, a feeling, a pull in her chest, as if the Force itself whispered, "You must come." She arrived not with a fleet or mission, but with quiet steps and a silent heart. With Ezra Bridger at her side and Kanan Jarrus watching every shadow. And deep within those ancient halls, beneath stone engraved with pain, she met him. Not Anakin. No, that name was gone. What stood before her was Darth Vader dark, deliberate, unstoppable. A silhouette wrapped in fury and machinery. A lightsaber hissed. Red, not blue. Not the blade she remembered guiding in training or watching blaze through droids with grace. This was not her master. And yet, it was. In the curve of his movement, in the rhythm of his silence, in the tremble beneath her breath, she called out, her voice low, steady. "Anakin." But the mask didn't flinch. The voice behind it replied deep and distorted. "Anakin Skywalker was weak. I destroyed him." Still, she stood firm. "Then I will avenge him." But even as she said it, her heart broke because she didn't want vengeance. She wanted the truth. She wanted a sign that something, anything of her old teacher remained beneath that mask. The duel that followed was more than sabers and sparks. It was sorrow meeting rage, memory striking against destiny. Each clash of their blades echoed years of laughter, loss, betrayal, and brotherhood. She fought not just to survive, but to reach him, to peel back the armor. And for a moment, just one, it happened. The mask broke, a slash across the helmet. A piece of Vader fell away, and there was Anakin's eye. Just one, blue, familiar, flickering with light and torment. "Ahsoka," he whispered. And in that whisper, the galaxy paused. The Force trembled. Time wept. Her name spoken not by a monster, but by the man she once knew. But it didn't last. The fire returned. The darkness surged. The moment passed like a breath in the cold. The temple collapsed. The others escaped. But Ahsoka, she stayed, not because she wanted to die, but because she could not run. Not from him, not from the pain. She disappeared beneath the rubble, not gone, but hidden. The galaxy assumed she perished, but she lived, changed, quieted, wounded in a way no healing crystal could mend. Yet even then, Ahsoka did not fall. She rose again later, Elsewhere, in places where her name became a symbol, not of the Jedi, but of something new. Ahsoka Tano had once been many things: a youngling, a Padawan, a soldier, a fugitive. Now, she became a guide, a bridge between what was and what must be. No longer clinging to titles, no longer haunted by masks. And yet, behind her calm, she still carried his name: Anakin. The man she couldn't save, the friend she still loved, not to fix him, not to change what had happened, but to honor the part of him that once believed in her, and that, for a flicker of light behind a shattered mask, remembered her still. As the Force flowed around her once more, softer now, steadier, she breathed in the stars, not as a Jedi, not as a warrior, but as Ahsoka, the one who stayed. Time, in the Force, was never a straight line. It was a river, yes, but one with many hidden currents, secret chambers, and echoes of footsteps that hadn't yet walked. For Ahsoka Tano, time bent in quiet ways. She had fallen once, lost beneath the rubble of Malachor, but not destroyed. The galaxy whispered she had died, that the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker had perished with her master. But the Force had other plans. Somewhere beyond ruins, beyond sound and shadow, Ahsoka found herself walking through a realm unlike anything she'd ever known. A place of silence and stars, doors and echoes. A place where every step led not forward, but anywhere. It was called the world between worlds. Its halls stretched in all directions, laced with glowing paths and swirling constellations, a vast temple of possibility outside of time. And there she walked. No fear, only wonder, only questions. Her fingertips brushed the air like it was water, each pulse shimmering with moments past battles, old friends, voices from history murmuring like wind through the trees. The Force will be with you. I am one with the Force. You must let go. But then a voice, not a memory, but a call. Ezra. She turned, another ripple in the stream. He had come, the boy from Lothal, braver than he knew, searching not for power, but for meaning. He had pulled her through time, plucked her from her fate on Malachor, saving her just before Vader's final strike. He had opened the door. But with the door came danger. Emperor Palpatine reached across the veil, his presence cold, crackling like fire and ice. He sought the power to rewrite everything. But Ahsoka knew this place was not meant for control. It was sacred. It was choice. And with quiet wisdom, she guided Ezra to do what few ever could, to say goodbye, to accept the past and let it be. You can't save him, she said gently, as Ezra looked toward a window showing his own master Kanan in his final sacrifice. Not without risking everything. She saw the pain in his eyes. She had known it herself, had once wanted to go back, to fix what went wrong, to save Anakin before he fell. But time was not to be rewritten. It was to be honored. They closed the windows. They fled the darkness. And Ahsoka chose to stay. She slipped once more into the folds of the Force, not dead, not gone, but waiting, learning, listening, for when the galaxy would need her again, and it would. For though the Clone Wars were long over, and the Empire's shadow fell like night across the stars, sparks of rebellion still flickered in the dark. And Ahsoka, neither Jedi nor ghost, would soon rise from silence to guide those sparks into flame. When Ahsoka stepped out of the world between worlds, she did not re-enter the galaxy as she had left it. Time had moved forward without her, yet somehow, she had moved through time as well. The war was over, the Empire had risen, and the people she had once known, Anakin, But Ahsoka was not one to fade. She returned as a shadow at first, watching the galaxy slip deeper into oppression, hearing whispers of rebellion brewing in distant corners. She walked among the broken, quietly helping where she could. The Force called to her in subtler ways, now not as a commander, not as a soldier, but as a witness to balance. Cloaked in white and bearing no Jedi title, she wandered far, changing names as easily as robes. Some knew her as Ashla. Others simply called her a friend. And then one day, when the galaxy began to turn once more, she crossed paths again with Ezra Bridger, no longer a boy, but a rebel leader forging his path. The planet was Lothal, and the Empire's grip had tightened. Ahsoka knew the shape of tyranny. She had seen it born. And so, when the time came to stand beside Ezra, Sabine, Kanan, and Hera, she didn't hesitate. The Ghost Crew welcomed her not as a Jedi, but as something else, someone who understood what the Empire had taken, and what it might cost to resist it. She became their guide through ancient knowledge and Force-laced mysteries. She sought answers in the Jedi Temple on Lothal, decoding symbols, unlocking echoes from the past. And in that temple, time brushed her skin again, familiar humming. It was here she realized how deeply the Force wove all stories together, that every ending was also a beginning, that even in the darkest tide of Empire, light waited in small, stubborn stars. When Kanan gave his life to save his family, Ahsoka mourned deeply, but she also understood. It was the kind of sacrifice that could not be undone, only honored. And then, Ezra was gone too. He had vanished with Grand Admiral Thrawn, taken by the hyperspace whales. The Purrgil, a farewell that was not a goodbye, only a pause. Ahsoka didn't cry. She waited. Time, after all, had brought her back before. And so she waited, until the day the sky turned silver again. Until a Mandalorian came bearing Beskar and mystery. Until whispers of the child Grogu stirred the Force in strange new ways. Until Sabine stood by her side once more, armor gleaming, hope alive, and with her staff, her robes, and the white owl called Morai always near, Ahsoka Tano set off again. Not as a Jedi, not as a soldier, not even as a rebel, but as something quieter, deeper, older. A guide through the ripples of time, a guardian of balance, a bridge between the worlds. And wherever she walked across ashes, stars, or silence, the Force moved with her. Ahsoka Tano had always walked a path between destinies, between light and dark, war and peace, Jedi and something else. But this new path was clearer than any before. Ezra Bridger had vanished, gone in a brilliant burst of hyperspace light, swallowed by the stars along with Grand Admiral Thrawn. Some said he had sacrificed himself. Others believed he was lost. But Ahsoka knew better. She had once been saved from certain death by Ezra, plucked from time by his voice, by his faith in her story. Now it was her turn to return the favor. So she journeyed quietly through distant sectors of the galaxy, to old temples and ancient ruins, to places where the veil between force and matter was thin. Sometimes with Sabine Wren at her side, sometimes alone beneath skies that whispered of forgotten wars and unspoken futures. She asked no one for permission. She made no declarations. She simply searched. Clues came in symbols, in remnants of Thrawn's strategies, in old star charts forgotten by the Empire. She followed trails like threads of starlight, pulling her closer to something unseen but deeply felt. Along the way, she helped where she could, freeing prisoners, healing wounds, guiding lost travelers. But always The search continued. Some worlds welcomed her with open arms. Others feared the quiet warrior with twin white lightsabers. Whispers began to follow her, of a woman draped in gray and white, of a warrior who asked questions of the wind and vanished like mist. She was called the Ghost of the Clone Wars by some, the White Blade by others. But to those who truly knew, she was just Ahsoka. One day a vision came, not from the stars, but from within. A vision of a vast place beyond known hyperspace routes, a region hidden from most galactic maps. The legend of Padawan, a world tied to ancient force cults and the origin of the Night Sisters' power. It was there the echoes pointed. It was there Thrawn had disappeared. It was there Ezra might still live. So Ahsoka, with determination quiet as snowfall, began to gather what was needed. A star map long thought to be myth. A ship attuned to non-linear paths. And Sabine, brave Sabine, still stubborn, still loyal, still grieving. Ahsoka had kept her distance for a time, uncertain whether to teach her, to guide her, but now the moment had come to move forward, together. The bond between them was not master and apprentice in the Jedi sense. It was more complex than that, more human. Sabine had lost Ezra too, and though their methods differed, their goal was shared. They would find him. The journey was not swift. There were trials, battles with remnants of Imperial loyalists, puzzles buried deep in Jedi ruins, and inner demons neither had fully named. Ahsoka faced flashes of her past, Anakin's voice in her memory, his fall echoing like thunder. And still, she walked forward, because Ezra had given her a second chance at life. Now she would give him a second chance at home. As they neared their destination, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Old myths stirred awake, force signatures twisted strangely. The very fabric of travel shifted. Padawan was not just another planet, it was something else. Ahsoka could feel it. Not a trap, not a prison, but a place of deep, ancient knowing, something that tested not strength, but spirit. Before them lay one final threshold, a gate of starfire, long lost, long guarded. Sabine hesitated. Ahsoka nodded once. "He's waiting," she whispered, and they stepped through. The path to Ezra was never a straight line. It twisted like stardust caught in a current, looping through memory and myth, each clue half whispered by ghosts of the past. Ahsoka had long accepted that time was not her master. The world between worlds had taught her that. And so, she no longer moved with urgency, she moved with intention. Nights were quiet on the ship as stars passed slowly by the viewport. Sabine often sat alone, her sketchbook open, drawing symbols she barely understood. Old Lothal glyphs, dreams she couldn't place, fragments of a boy's smile from long ago. Ahsoka would glance over and offer no correction, only stillness. She knew that sometimes what we draw is what we're trying to remember, or trying not to forget. One hyperspace jump led to a derelict station orbiting a dying star, once used by the Chiss for long-range tracking. Another brought them to an ancient Jedi outpost buried beneath the sands of a red moon. At every stop, they were watched by creatures, by codes, by those who feared Thrawn's return more than they hoped for Ezra's. Ahsoka didn't waste words. She asked questions with her eyes, listened with her presence, and when needed, defended with her blades. But always without anger. She fought as if the Force itself breathed through her, not beside her. In a broken temple near the edge of wild space, she found something more than clues. A memory. A place where she had once trained with Anakin long ago. Dusty walls still held the marks of his saber. It was here that she once doubted herself, and here that she chose to keep going. Sabine watched her from the doorway, saying nothing. But something passed between them. The past didn't vanish. It folded into the present. They weren't just searching for Ezra anymore. They were searching for themselves. Paradia's call grew stronger. Nights were filled with strange dreams, whispers, owls, the soft hum of the Force, like a distant song only those who had suffered could truly hear. And the more they approached the place, the more Ahsoka felt it wasn't just Ezra's fate they were chasing. It was balance, correction, a tether between old wars and new peace. One night, Sabine asked softly, "Do you think he's still the same?" Ahsoka paused before answering. "No one ever is, but hearts don't change. Not really." That was enough. They arrived at the Eye of Sion not as conquerors, but as seekers. Thrawn's return was not their concern in that moment. This was personal. Ahsoka stood before the great map that lit up the stars between galaxies. A thread of light danced from Lothal to the unknown, a symbol not of certainty, but of hope. She remembered Ezra's words, his calm, even in chaos, his sacrifice. That kind of courage doesn't fade. It waits. And now, they would follow. As the map aligned and the stars themselves opened like a door, Sabine reached for her weapon. Ahsoka gently placed a hand over hers. "No need. This journey is one of light." And so they left the known galaxy. Not in battle, not in fear, but in faith. Faith that even in the furthest corners of the stars, friendship echoes. That bravery is never wasted. That love, true, quiet, loyal love, stretches across time and space. Ezra had once saved her by reaching into the impossible. Now she was doing the same. And in that final moment, before hyperspace flared, Ahsoka closed her eyes and whispered his name. The stars stretched thin as the Eye of Sion tore through hyperspace, a long bridge between galaxies that had not been crossed in thousands of years. Inside that bridge, time felt still. The hum of engines was steady, yet beneath it ran something deeper, a quiet vibration that Ahsoka could feel in her chest. She sat with her eyes closed, hands folded in meditation, but her mind was awake. Awake in the Force. Awake to memories, to presence. She saw Ezra again, not just the boy who vanished, but the young man who had once stood beside her, curious and kind, full of questions and courage. He had spoken about connection, about trusting the Force even when it didn't make sense. And now, across impossible distances, she trusted him, trusted that he was alive, trusted that he was waiting. Sabine, meanwhile, stared out into the tunnel of light, arms crossed over her chest. For her, this journey wasn't just about Ezra. It was about forgiveness, about facing what she had done and hadn't done, her decision to hand over the map, her belief that finding Ezra would make it all right again. But deep inside, she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure what they would find, or what Ezra might think of her choices. Ahsoka eventually rose and stood beside her. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said gently. "I gave them the map," Sabine said. "They used it to bring Thrawn back. That's on me." Ahsoka nodded slowly. "Yes, and yet, here you are, still choosing to make it right. That's what matters." The Force shimmered faintly around them as the Eye of Sion neared its destination, a galaxy unfamiliar, its stars colder and spread thinner. And then, Paradia. The ancient home of the Dathomiri, a forgotten world ringed with space whalebones and cloaked in a red haze. Here, magic ran like roots through stone, and death was never truly final. The ship descended slowly, silence falling over everyone aboard. For a moment, even Ahsoka held her breath. The ground felt strange beneath their feet, ancient, waiting. They walked across the crimson sands, their boots stirring up dust that hadn't moved in centuries. Towering spires jutted into the sky like the ribs of a long-dead god. Above them, shadows flew, not birds, not ships, something in between, watching. And in the distance, a shape, a tower, a place of power. They approached carefully. Ahsoka's lightsabers were still at her sides, but she didn't reach for them. She had no desire for battle here, only reunion, only clarity. Inside the ancient ruin, lit by flame and whisper, they finally saw him. Ezra. Older now, his eyes still wide with light, but his frame stronger. He wore simple robes, his saber hanging from a woven sash. He stood calmly, like he had been waiting forever, and yet wasn't surprised at all. Sabine ran to him first, a blur of motion, voice cracking with disbelief. "Ezra!" He smiled. "Took you long enough." They embraced, and for a long moment, nothing else mattered. No war, no empire, no past mistakes. Just three friends standing under ancient stars, connected again by something far older than themselves. When Ahsoka stepped forward, Ezra's face softened. "You came too." "I told you I would," she replied. He nodded. "I knew you'd find a way." The three of them sat by a low fire that night, flames flickering against stone walls older than the Jedi Order. Ezra told them of Thrawn's exile, of the strange witches who ruled from the shadows, of how the Force here was different, thicker, wilder, quieter. He had survived, not by fighting, but by listening. Ahsoka listened too, not just to the story, but to the way Ezra spoke. He had changed, grown, but the core of him was unchanged. He was still the boy who had once reached out to save others, even at great cost to himself. Sabine asked what they all feared. "Do you want to go back?" Ezra stared into the fire. "Part of me never left." They understood. Returning would not be easy. Thrawn's plans were already unfolding. Peridea was not finished with them. But none of that could touch the quiet moment they shared that night. Friends reunited, ghosts laid to rest, the Force surrounding them like a blanket. Later, as the fire dimmed and Ezra drifted into sleep, Ahsoka sat quietly, eyes lifted toward the stars. Somewhere, Anakin's spirit stirred, watching, guiding, and maybe smiling. She whispered a single word into the night. "Thank you." When the stars turned softer and the sky above Peridea began to whisper its ancient songs, Ahsoka stood beneath it, not as a warrior, not as a fugitive, not even as a Jedi, but as something quieter, calmer, and newly whole. The title had not been given to her, it had formed from the light around her. Ahsoka the White, they would call her, not for the robes she now wore, luminous, flowing, kissed by dawnlight, but for what she had become. A being of clarity, a guardian without dogma, a protector without pride. She had crossed time itself, walked among the echoes of the Force, and emerged not with answers, but with peace. The name Ahsoka Tano still lived within her, of course, child of Shilly, Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, soldier of 1,000 battles. But now, there was distance between her and all that pain. She could remember it without becoming it. Her steps were no longer urgent. They were graceful, like blades, but flowed like water. Beside her, the Togruta wolf Morai circled in silent blessing, a creature of the Force that had always watched, always guided. And somewhere in the rippling web of reality, Anakin's spirit drifted nearby. No longer warning her, just smiling. She wore white, not to erase her past, but to honor every shadow she had survived. As she walked across the high ridges of Peridea, each step felt like the closing of a chapter, not in sadness, but in softness. She thought of those who had guided her, Master Plo Koon, who first found her as a child, Master Yoda, who had once spoken in riddles but with truth, Anakin, whose heart had loved too deeply and burned because of it, and of Obi-Wan, long gone into the currents of the Force, but still teaching in his quiet way. These memories no longer brought the ache they once did. They were warm now, like distant stars on a clear night. Ezra and Sabine walked ahead, planning, whispering, ready to face Thrawn's final rise. But Ahsoka, she was no longer chasing. She was watching, guiding, like a lighthouse amid galactic storm. For the first time in years, her heart did not feel heavy. She had let go of needing to be right, of needing to be Jedi, of needing to be anything but present. And in doing so, she had become something more. The Force flowed through her like wind through trees, not demanding obedience, only inviting harmony. She no longer asked, "What must I do?" but instead, "How can I help?" Even when battle came, and it always would, she moved with silence and grace. Twin sabers glowing not with fury, but with balance. Each strike was a note in a song older than the stars. Even the enemy could feel it. That presence, that calm, that light. And they hesitated, not out of fear, but reverence. For who strikes a shadowless figure in white? And so, she walked on through ruins and red skies, across moonlit plains and under nebulous storms, not as a soldier of destiny, but as its gentle reminder that not all who fall must be broken, that not all endings are sorrow, that sometimes, when the war has taken everything, what remains is the soul, pure, quiet, unshaken. She was Ahsoka, and so her journey became one not of where she was going, but how she walked through the galaxy now, lighter, quieter, but no less determined. Ahsoka did not need the Council's approval, nor a title etched in Jedi archives. She was beyond proving herself. The weight of the Clone Wars, the shadows of Order 66, the pain of betrayal, and the sting of loneliness. They had weathered her soul, yes, but they had not broken it. She had emerged from every fall softer, and that was her greatest strength. There was a stillness to her now that others noticed before she spoke. Whether standing beside the ghost of a star destroyer or kneeling in an orchard of force-sensitive trees, she breathed like the wind knew her name. Her ship glided like a memory through star lanes unknown, and her presence became legend to some a silent guardian that drifted just beyond the edge of battle, showing up when needed, then vanishing like smoke. But in the space between missions and meetings, she watched the younger one's Ezra, still playful beneath his wisdom. Sabine, sharp-edged but loyal. Grogu, curious and ancient, his thoughts humming with a rhythm of galaxies past. And sometimes, Ahsoka smiled at them the way her own masters once smiled at her, not to instruct, but to bless. She walked among ruins that had outlived empires, touched artifacts older than the Sith, and listened to whispers in the Force that spoke not in commands, but in lullabies. Her lightsabers, still white as moonlight, rarely needed to ignite, not because danger was gone, but because peace had followed her in. Even her enemies seemed to understand. This was no longer the Padawan who fought out of fear or pride. This was a woman who had made peace with all versions of herself. In her solitude, She had met every fragment of who she had been. The child on Shili, the fierce student on the front lines, the fugitive fleeing Coruscant's lies, the ghost on the run from her former master, the warrior who'd stood in the wreckage of Mandalore. And she had forgiven them all. She had forgiven herself. In meditation, she often revisited the place between worlds, that strange dimension of time, echoes, and glowing doors, not to change the past, but to honor it. She did not try to rescue Anakin from his path anymore. She simply stood in the silence and whispered thanks. Thank you for loving me as you did. Because love, even when twisted by fear, had been at the root of everything he gave her. And perhaps that was the lesson all along. The Force was not a weapon or a code. It was connection, compassion, choice. And no council, no empire, no war could steal that truth from her. She had become the kind of Jedi that Jedi were meant to be, and yet not a Jedi at all. Just Ahsoka. That was enough. That was everything. In the far corners of space, where forgotten temples hummed with ancient light and wild creatures sang beneath broken moons, she left small gifts behind. A stone circle rebalanced, a seed planted, a lost holocron restored. Her path was no longer about saving the galaxy. It was about healing what was overlooked. The quiet wounds, the places peace forgot. Children who thought the Force was a myth. She would sit with them, tell no tales of her battles, but only of stars that sing and trees that remember names. Sometimes at night, the ghost of Anakin would return, not to lecture or mourn, but simply to watch the stars beside her. They would not speak much. There was no need. Their silence said everything. And in that stillness, Ahsoka knew she had succeeded where he could not in war, but in inner peace. And because of that, their story was not tragedy, it was redemption. Slow, gentle, earned. And so she walked on, through worlds that slept and suns that wept, through echoes and dreams. And everywhere she went, the Force remembered her name. And now, the story of Ahsoka Tano comes to rest, not with an ending, but with a breath gentle, steady, and full of light. She was never the chosen one, never the Grand Master, never the face carved into the statues of Jedi temples long buried in dust. And yet, her name lives on in places deeper than history, in the whisper of balance restored, in the lives she touched but never claimed, in the flame that never burned the world, but quietly kept it warm. She was the student who walked away and still carried the best parts of her masters, the warrior who lost everything and still found reasons to smile, the outcast who became a guardian, not through power, but through presence, through the quiet decision to return again and again, even when no one called. Her story was not carved by destiny, but by choice, thousands of small, stubborn choices to be kind, to keep going, to stay human even in the shadow of war. And in that, she became something beyond Jedi. She became Ahsoka, a name that meant hope, a name that meant you are not alone. When others fell to the dark, she stood in the gray and waited. When others shouted, she listened. When others gave up, she whispered back, not yet. There was a time she thought walking away from the Order was a fall from the path, but now we know it was the path. The Force had never abandoned her. It simply needed her to see with new eyes. And now, at the far edge of the galaxy, beyond the wars, beyond the titles, beyond the past, Ahsoka walks beneath unfamiliar stars with familiar peace. Her boots tread lightly across soil she does not need to conquer. Her sabers hang silent. Her eyes, once wide with fire and fear, now carry oceans of calm. Perhaps she finds Ezra again. Perhaps she doesn't. That part of the story isn't ours to know. What matters is that she looks forward, still curious, still kind, still holding the Force not as a weapon, but as a friend. And somewhere out there, Anakin watches. Not with guilt, not with grief, but with pride. He sees in her the Jedi he wished he could have been: patient, forgiving, free. And in that small moment, even the ghost of Vader rests. Because Ahsoka lives. And because she lives, so does balance. So does hope. So do the quiet, brave ones who walk through darkness with a steady light. Tonight, as you rest your head and drift into dreams, remember her not just as the Togruta who survived wars, escaped death, and challenged destiny. Remember her as the one who stayed true, the one who listened to her heart, the one who believed in life after endings, after loss, after silence. She never needed to be the loudest, just the most true. And that was enough. That was everything. So close your eyes now. Let the Force hum like a lullaby around you. Let the stars whisper soft names. Let your breath slow, like hers does now, beneath a sky of endless peace. The battle is over. The flame still burns, not to destroy, but to guide. You are safe. You are loved. You are home.